they innovate the genre every time a new game is put out. No? What did I just say? We're still not talking about that one. And believe me, that abomination is getting its own video on why it's a terrible sequel. I really didn't want to make this video. I told you kind viewers I would make a video on Devil May Cry 2, and so I shall. Truth be told, this is one of my least favorite games of all time, as it has little to no redeeming qualities, but how can this be when the previous entry is held in such high regard? Well, I've got two words for you. Rushed development. As many of you know, Devil May Cry is a staple franchise in action games, with much praise being given to the games whenever a new entry pops up. However, there is a black sheep in this series, and that would be DMC2, the game that almost killed the franchise. The development history for this game is an extremely rough one, with directors being replaced, deadlines being set without the chance for delays, and quite strange collaborations. Before we really dive into this though, I'd just like to point out that while this is a very negative review, that does not mean your opinion is wrong if you really like this game. I just personally believe that this is a poorly made game under unfavorable conditions, and wish to explain why it is seen under such a negative light. The first mistake made by Capcom was rushing the development of a sequel without first asking Hideki Kamiya, the creator of the original, if he would like to develop one. They instead chose to hand over the development of the sequel to Capcom Studio 1, which had been responsible for making arcade games. As you can tell, this was most definitely not the way to go, as arcade and home console games are very different in their nature. One of their main goals regarding the sequel was expanding the environments of its predecessor, and while they did achieve this, making the environments approximately 9 times larger than the first entry, they also forgot to take into account that bigger doesn't always mean better, and so the majority of the environments feel extremely empty, especially when compared to the first game and its magnitude of detail, as you could interact with a large proportion of its environment to gain more insight into the world. 6 months prior to the game's release, Capcom realized that not much was being done, and decided to place Hideaki Itsuno in charge of development, a decision which forever changed the course of this franchise, as after this game's fiasco, Itsuno wished to redeem himself, and ended up producing one of the most perfect games ever made. In later interviews, Itsuno spoke about how little work was actually finished by the time he was put in charge, as cutscenes hadn't been shot, Dante's Devil Trigger was still in its conceptual phase, and essentially not a single move had been produced aside from Stinger, which was already in the first game. However, by some miracle, Itsuno managed to turn out a playable game by the end of the 6 months, and managed to complete the criteria given to him by his superiors. But he chose to strive for a better product, and immediately asked to begin working on a better sequel. Devil May Cry 2 ended up releasing in January 2003, and its reception was mixed at best. While its decrease in difficulty did manage to bring some more casual players, a lot of the fans of the original were disappointed with this half-baked sequel, something which could have easily led to the death of the series. But boy, am I thankful that it did not. Right, that's enough preamble. Let's get into the meat of the video, and if at any point you wish to hear my thoughts on a certain part of the game, feel free to use the chapters to guide you through the video. And as always, if you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe, as it really helps me out. And only a small portion of you are actually subscribed. We're close to reaching 500 subscribers, and with my goal of reaching 1,000 by the end of the year, I feel we can do it. With that being said, let's jump into it. First, we'll start with some positives, which will be a brief section, but it's a section nevertheless. I got to admit, for all the mistakes this game has made, one thing that can't be denied is Dante's outfit design is excellent. Another positive I can give this game is the customizable Devil Trigger, allowing you to fine-tune Dante's DT as you see fit for your own gameplay style. which gives the player a bit more agency. This also links neatly into the story, as Dante is now more experienced, and therefore shouldn't have to rely on a devil arm to determine the way his devil trigger functions. Not that there are any devil arms in this game, anyway, but we'll get to that. Another cool thing in this game are all the movement options, allowing Dante to perform more stylish combos when moving from enemy to enemy. This also links to the more thought out gameplay animations in the sequel, such as Dante only putting his guns away when you swing your sword. I also really like how you have to fight some enemies in an elevator on the way up to Arius. And finally, Argosax is better than the rest of the bosses. Not particularly good, mind you, just better than the rest. Feeling more like something out of the other entries in the franchise, with his faster paced fight. And that about wraps up my positives for this hellish game, so how about we move on to everything this game does wrong? Starting with its greatest flaw, the god-awful story and its erasing of Dante's personality. Devil May Cry 2 has likely got the worst story I've ever experienced in a video game. And believe me, I've played my fair share of poorly written games. I guess the best way to go through this is just to analyze the story scene by scene, and point out where the sequel fails at expanding the universe or developing any of its characters. We begin with a shot of the moon, reminiscent of how the first entry opens with Trish descending from the moon. As we pan down to a museum, we begin hearing the narration of how Sparta rebelled against the other demons, which may be useful for new players, since the goal of the sequel was to attract a larger audience. However, if you've played the first game, you already know this story. We see a red-headed woman, and ironically, as the tale mentions how Sparta eradicated all the demons, two of them burst through the window to attack her, starting the trend of unintentional funny moments in this game, because it takes itself way too seriously. Dante will then appear out of nowhere, and after killing the demons, the two of them share this very stiff interaction. I'm not sure if this game was made using any sort of live-action reference scenes, as future titles would be, but if it was, something along the way went wrong, because these characters don't feel like people when interacting. Which one could argue is intended, given neither of these characters is technically human. But we already know Dante is not usually like this, and these strange emotionless interactions are riddled throughout the game. Dante asks her if she called and tosses a coin her way. This coin is a weird character trait they gave Dante in this game, making him a two-faced ripoff as he makes decisions with a flip of a coin. The woman throws a dagger at a map, basically letting Dante know where to meet her again, and with that the prologue is over. The first time I played this game, I thought this cutscene simply meant a darker shift for this franchise, given that Dante seemed alone again without Trish by his side, and maybe the story would be about finding her or something. I was soon about to find out I was very wrong, as we pick the story back up where the redhead told Dante to meet her. He stares at a small cottage from atop a large tower before leaping off to start making his way towards it, with again, no lines from him. On your way there, you'll begin encountering demons on your path, but you'll soon enough make it to the end of the level and get awarded with yet another dialogue-free cutscene, where Dante chooses to just stand there awkwardly, doing nothing. And here's where we get one of the funniest moments in the game, as absolutely out of nowhere the house just explodes. Dante rushes in to save Lucia, which, by the way, the game doesn't bother telling you her name until mission 12, so there's that. And then the mission just ends. Yes, it really does happen that abruptly. Can you tell these cutscenes were rushed yet? The next cutscene is of a random old lady who's later revealed to be Lucia's mother or something. She's named Matiere, and she reveals the plot of this game. Evil businessman wants demonic power to rule the world. Riveting. She also reveals she knew Dante's father, Sparta, and if Dante chooses to help out, she will tell him more about his father. Dante flips a coin and agrees to do so. After this, he'll make his way around the island, defeating the odd boss here and there, and manages to find a motorbike to get him to the city. Said motorbike proceeds to disappear when Dante gets to the city, and as you try to make your way forward, you get stopped by an infested helicopter, and partake in the slowest chase put to screen. We'll get another CGI cutscene after defeating the helicopter, and I'll admit, I do kinda like this one. I think that the concept of a skyscraper coming alive is one with potential, and while the fight itself is disappointing, its intro cutscene is a bit of a banger. After defeating this boss, Dante will spot a helicopter belonging to Arius, with the word Ouroboros on the side, which sadly forever associates this awful game with my favorite gaming villain of all time. The game once again teleports us somewhere with no indication as to how Dante got there. But we seem to find ourselves in a facility, searching for a way to the oil rig Arius flew towards. We'll find a tram to take us there, but as soon as we arrive, Arius gets on his helicopter, making these two missions completely pointless, as we haven't progressed the story in any way, and feel like they're just an excuse to having a timed mission, as the oil rig and facility are set to explode. And out of nowhere, we'll have the bike on us once again, and Dante rides off to God knows where, as this place consists of random ruins with no explanation as to why we went there. Dante will go underground and find Lucia holding a chalice, and at this point even Dante is bored with this story, as he does not care what Lucia has to say.
Now we can stop Arius's ambition.
Whatever.
Lucia says she does not deserve this power, and Dante just looks at her, with zero further questions. Returning to Mathieu with the chalice, she'll tell you to go back and save Lucia. Now that you have the final arcana, a term which has not been mentioned up until this point, because this game does not understand setup and payoff. Dante will flip a coin and it lands on heads again. I wonder where this could be going. We cut to Lucia being imprisoned and asking to be killed, and suddenly, once again, out of nowhere, Dante shows up. He willingly gives Arius the items he needs and challenges him to a fight, easily winning it.
I must obtain the power of Argosax, or I cannot transcend all living things.
Too easy.
You cannot win. Someone is holding you.
The hell does that mean?
Forget about me. Kill Arius.
Agreed. Kill him, Dante. You literally had him on his knees.
I've got you.
What? No. Go kill him, then he can't do anything. God damn it. We're now back in the region from Mission 3, but now the sky has darkened with an eclipse blocking the light. This part consists of Dante activating some switches to the demon world, but guarding the entrance is none other than Phantom. And this really ruins his death in the first game, as now Dante's display of power is kind of undermined by the fact that Phantom can just come back. But nevertheless, we make our way forward, which leads us into Arius' skyscraper. Yeah, this game decided to skip actually having an underworld, which in my opinion is for the better, since the underworlds shown in DMC 1 and 3 are so great, and I wouldn't want them ruined by this game's lack of creativity. Further up the skyscraper, we'll finally rid ourselves of Bulwark, the demon sending his wolves towards us. We now get the most random moment in the game, as going through a door will trigger a cutscene where the camera starts freaking out and we enter a different dimension of sorts to fight 3 floating heads. Why, you may ask? No clue. I mean, seriously, this guy's entry in the wiki is like 1 paragraph long. I have no idea what he's doing in the game. You finally reach the top of the building, where Arius is performing the ritual to become all-powerful, to control the stock exchange or something. I don't really care at this point. His ritual will begin failing, and this time, when Dante shows up to stop him, it's not out of nowhere, cause we actually led him here for once. And big plot twist, Dante switched the coins!
Is that the medallia? You switched them?
A false coin for a false god.
God, I can't take this seriously.
Showtime.
And once Arius has been defeated, we get a line that not only rivals, but may very well exceed the "fill your dark soul with light" from the first game.
My dream! My life! I was going to be the king of this world!
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
I love how the mission ends so abruptly. Like, seriously, there is zero thought put into any of these mission endings. They just end. Back on the ground, Lucia attacks Dante and tells him to kill her because she is a devil created by Arius. And I'ma be real, her plotline sounds more interesting than anything I've played through up until this point. The two of them get interrupted by a massive black hole / gateway appearing, and Dante goes in to stop the final threat, knowing very well he may not return. Lucia wants to go instead, but upon seeing her shedding a tear, Dante determines she could not be a devil, and flips a coin for it, with it once again landing on heads, allowing him to go in. In this other dimension, Dante is faced with Argosax the Chaos, an amalgamation of every boss in the game, as well as an unexpected appearance from Griffin, go figure. Defeating this creature reveals the true Argosax, nicknamed the Despair Embodied. And as much as I criticize this game, this is one part they do right, as this final boss is a decent climatic fight. And I actually really like the ending to this fight, as Dante seemingly disappears, having Argosax check his surroundings before he sees Dante holding him at gunpoint, and finishing him off with a single bullet. Which is actually really neat when looked at as Dante reaching his peak power, back when DMC2 was still the final game in the timeline. The progression of Dante's power goes from him requiring Sparta's Devil Trigger to defeat Mundus, to then only requiring his own DT when defeating Abigail in the animated series, and finally not having the need for his DT when putting an end to Argosax. The game then finishes with a cutscene of Dante riding his bike. No clue how that got there, but you know, DMC2. And he delivers an unenthusiastic,
Yeah. Let's go all the way to hell.
and he rides off into nowhere. Before you ask, no, I will not be going into detail on Lucia's campaign. All you gotta know is it's still plenty of boring cutscenes, but some of the things actually get explained this time around. It's seriously not worth delving into, as many of you will not even make it to this part of the game, from how bored you were of the first half. Just a quick note, originally this section would also include me talking about the enemies and bosses, similarly to how I did this in my first video. However, upon replaying this game, I really found nothing of worth, with most bosses boiling down to building up your DT gauge, if you haven't already, and holding down shoot to melt through any enemy health bars. So instead, I'll just mention any new additions to Dante's moveset. I would also like to talk about Lucia and the secret character Trish, but there's not much to mention, and I also feel like most people wouldn't make it far enough into the sequel to play as either of them. Okay, time to criticize the gameplay. And honestly, this can be boiled down pretty easily to, what if we copied the base moves from DMC1, but removed any power behind Dante's swings and gave him no different weapons, other than the same sword but big, or the same sword but long. Wow, such variety. To be fair though, this is the game that introduces Rebellion, which will be Dante's staple sword for the remainder of the franchise. One issue that stems from all the weapons feeling so similar, with no unlockable moves, is that there feels like there's no point in upgrading more than one weapon, as the combat will remain mostly the same, meaning you'll likely just leave any new weapons at their weakest level, because it's not worth spending your red orbs on getting a new weapon to the same level as your current one, and the same can be said about the firearms. The guns remain mostly the same too, but now we have the extra submachine guns, which allow you to just hold down shoot and you have officially just unlocked extra easy mode. Simply upgrade this bad boy to max, and you basically have the equivalent of Devil Trigger for the cost of nothing. One addition that is both positive and negative in this game is having the right button now being a button with a dedicated ability, rather than just being another button to fire your guns. The usage of this button would be expanded on in future entries in the series with the styles. However, this game made the decision of making it a dedicated dodge button, and I have very mixed feelings on this. For one, I love the different animations of Dante dodging. I like how dodging backwards 3 times in a row will lead him to do a backflip, and I love the smoothness of the side flips or running alongside walls. My issue comes when dodging does not feel nearly as responsive as rolling does in all the other entries. However, it also makes the game very easy. It's this weird paradox where dodging is a get out of jail free card, but at the same time feels so awkward to use that I'd just rather have rolling back. I don't know, it's difficult to describe. It's a similar feeling to how, despite the animations looking better in the sequel, they make each swing much stiffer and lacking when it comes to feedbacks on the hit. This is just one of those things that you can only understand once you play it. Speaking of, this game has one of the worst lock-on systems I have ever witnessed. Remember how in my previous video I complained that Nightmare felt awkward to fight because Dante naturally swings his sword towards him rather than the switch to keep the light on? Well, this game makes it even worse, as Dante is permanently locked onto any enemy in the same room as him. It does not matter how far away or if the enemy is off screen, Dante will not swing his sword any other way no matter how hard you try. The final new gameplay addition this game has is the secret Devil Trigger form, which only activates if Dante is at a very low level of health, as indicated by the health bar turning red, and it kind of functions as a precursor to Dante's Sin Devil Trigger in the MC5, allowing Dante to transform into this massive creature. This form is absolutely overpowered, easily shredding through anything in its path, which just serves to add to one of the game's biggest flaws, the difficulty problem. Cutting straight to the point, the MC2 is far too easy and tedious for the DMC gameplay loop. Enemies die far too quickly, and the guns feel like the strongest part of your arsenal, which is never a good sign when it comes to a hack and slash. When I first played this game, I don't recall even seeing the death screen, as whenever I had the rare occasion where my health dropped below half, I would just pop the new Devil Trigger and absolutely clean house and restore my health. In fact, I may not have even upgraded my health by finding blue orbs, because I simply did not need the extra health, and going out of my way to find these hidden throughout the levels simply meant playing more of this awful game. Hell, 90% of enemies and bosses can be beaten by shooting your guns as fast as possible whilst backing up away from them, as the guns will begin juggling the enemies for you. And again, the very act of changing your upgrades to straight damage buffs rather than new moves makes Dante way too powerful as you progress throughout the game, especially given that there seems to be little to no stronger base enemies, as you tend to fight the same enemies with the same health pools instead of it scaling up as you scale up your damage. And this leads nicely into the final nail in the coffin for this game, which is its extremely poor level design. And I really do mean that. I mean, seriously, most of the levels in this game are creatively bankrupt, and no thought has been put into the player experience as they traverse them. For example, when we arrived to the more modern city, I thought they would do some new things with a new environment such as this, like traversing collapsed buildings or perhaps seeing the odd broken road. But nope, instead we have long empty streets broken up by the occasional infested tank, or the dreaded helicopter fight. Out of this entire part of the game, the only cool thing that happened was the building turning into a demon. But even then, the actual fight just consists of you shooting it from afar while dodging very slow projectiles. It's like they take a cool concept and completely strip it of any fun the player might have. To really get my point across, let's see how this game starts. So, we begin by walking aimlessly until we find some enemies, then walk some more until we find a room with enemies, then walk some more through the streets with the same 5 copy-pasted houses until we stumble onto a cutscene. That's mission 1 done. Wanna know what mission 2 is like? It's the same thing, but in a sewer. They waited about 10 minutes before placing the player in a sewer. A level type which I believe is no one's favorite, unless you're playing a really good horror game, and even then, sewer levels still feel a bit uninspired unless done right. I mean, seriously, most missions in this game rely on you walking aimlessly for a few minutes before you figure out your destination. Or instead, they're so linear they feel like they're constantly holding your hand. One good thing that did come out of this, however, is they started to increase the proportion and variety of boss fights with this game, which at least helps to soften the blow a little bit, as you can just act like the levels themselves are simply a prelude to the actual fight at the end. But then again, the bosses are all so easy that it barely helps improve the overall level. I mean, seriously, take a game like DMC4, which literally makes you replay the same levels twice to beat it, and you still get more variety and enjoyment than this game's 2 separate campaigns. Which, let's talk about the second campaign real quick, which barely anyone played, myself included, before making this video. Not only does Lucia have to go through the same areas for most of her campaign, but also her only new level is set underwater. I mean, seriously, why take one of the most disliked sections of the original and put it in a sequel? And finally, if I believe there is anything that will make you understand just how boring this game is, then it most certainly is this. Every single secret mission in this game is you being spawned in a small square arena and fighting a handful of enemies with literally 0 winning conditions. Do you understand just how repetitive that is? You have to do this 20 times if for some reason you choose to play this game to full completion. And better yet, just to top it all off, only 10 of these rooms will actually drop a blue orb, so half of them are straight up pointless. I'm not done yet. See, I lied to you a few moments ago. There is something even more egregious, more vile, and disgusting than the secret missions in this game. And that would be Mission 5. This mission is single-handedly the worst level I have ever played in a video game, period. You know how a lot of people have their favorite mission in a video game? Well, Mission 5 in Devil May Cry 2 is the antithesis to that. It starts you with a fight against 2 fast enemies in an enclosed space, before moving you into the most boring open section of a game, as you have literally nothing to do. In the next screen, they'll recycle a boss you've already fought, and give you no goddamn indication as where to go, and you'll just wander around until you finally decide to try to jump over the truck blocking the road, despite nothing being visible behind it, and it clearly representing an unpassable point. But lo and behold, it works. Your reward for figuring this out is fighting the most brain-dead enemies in the form of tanks, as you will just sit there, spamming your guns, or climb atop and hit them with your sword rendering them useless in seconds. You fight 2 of these on the ground, and the third on a road leading you up. And common sense would dictate that this is the way forward. But oh no, has this game got no sense of how to lead the player the right way. Wanna know what you do instead? See that long fucking road that seemingly leads nowhere? Well, if you choose to go that way, a helicopter will show up out of nowhere and blow a hole in the wall for you. What you mean that was impossible for you to predict? Was it not obvious enough? Going through this hole will lead you into a huge building where the helicopter will chase you as you make your way up, and the game forces you to quickly platform your way to the top, as doing so poorly will lead you to taking damage from fire, I guess? And guess what, game? Just because you slightly improved Dante's air movement, it sure as hell does not mean it is by any means good enough to make tight jumps. Once you reach the rooftop, you may think it's over, and you finally get to fight the helicopter. But you would be wrong, because now you have to platform across multiple rooftops as you are quote-unquote chased by the helicopter, because in fact it does nothing to you. You'll finally reach a very tall building for your encounter, and the game expects you to climb it all the way to the top. But please, do yourself a favor and just equip the flying amulet to skip this part. Believe me, your time is more important than whatever this game asks of you. And only now do we get to fight this damned helicopter. Because up until this point, whatever damage you've already dealt to its health bar is simply nulled, and you will have to start over. And seriously, this boss fight is an absolute joke, as it merely consists of you holding down shoot for about 5 minutes, as most of the attacks will simply miss you when standing still. And please, for the love of God, do not move up the pillars. You stand to gain nothing and lose everything, as getting knocked will have you climbing all the way back to the top. And if for some unknown reason you somehow die, probably to the missiles that take a massive chunk off your health, you know what that means? You get to do the fucking chase all over again. Isn't this fun? Are you not having fun playing this? Sorry about that. Where were we? Oh yeah, wrapping up my thoughts on the game. Honestly, I could go on about how this game suffers from an uninspired level design, poor storytelling, and very lacking gameplay, which lets down its predecessor, such as having stiff combat animations or the absolute sin that is removing the ability to purchase new actions. But in all fairness, I cannot blame the development team for everything, as once Itsuno came on board they really began working on a multitude of new ideas, such as an FF7 inspired bike section, which sadly never came to be. This game really is a product of rushed development and unfortunate decisions at the start of the project, which sadly sets it apart from the rest of the series in a negative way, as it is widely regarded as the worst in the franchise, with my personal score for this game being a 4 out of 10. I am just glad that the tragedy of this game led to the masterpiece that is Dante's Awakening, and I am more excited to talk about that game, as it's on my list of top 20 games of all time. Thanks to any of you who've watched up to this point. I know this video is a bit shorter than usual, but I just couldn't find much to say about this game, as it's the shortest and most forgettable in the franchise. I mean, seriously, the recap for this game in the MC5 is a single vague sentence. So if the developers wish to forget this game happened, then so will I. I would also like to remind you that just because I dislike this game, it does not mean you have to dislike it too. If this game happens to be your favorite, then more power to you. But I just personally do not enjoy playing it, and I hope this video explained why. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll see you next time.
What are you doing?
Granny,